Ashes of November. Welcome to Story Forge. Today, we bring you an emotional autumn tale, Ashes of November. This is the story of Nathan, a retired firefighter who faces the silence of November after losing the love of his life. In the falling leaves, the fading light, and the quiet streets of his small town, he begins to search for healing, memory, and hope. The language is simple and clear, perfect for listening and learning English. At the same time, the story is full of atmosphere, emotion, and useful expressions. So, sit back, listen carefully, and let the autumn voices guide you through this journey. Chapter 1: The Silent Town. The last days of October had slipped away like smoke, leaving only the chill of November in the air. The town of Maple Hollow, tucked between hills and forests, seemed to hold its breath as the season turned. The trees had already released most of their leaves. What remained were skeleton branches scratching at the gray sky, and carpets of red, gold, and brown covering the sidewalks. In Maple Hollow, time always moved slowly, but in November it slowed even more. The harvest was finished. The tourists who came in September to see the leaves had gone home. The streets now belonged only to the townspeople and the restless wind. Among those who stayed was Thomas Hale, a man of 58. He had retired early from his work as a firefighter in Richmond. Years of smoke, flames, and long nights had marked his face with deep lines, though his eyes were still clear and steady. He carried himself with quiet strength, but also with a heaviness he could not shake. Thomas had moved back to Maple Hollow a year ago, after his wife, Anna, passed away. He told himself he wanted the peace of the countryside, the calm of small-town life. But truthfully, he had come back because Maple Hollow was the last place that still felt familiar, the last place that remembered him before the losses, before the silence that now lived in his house. A walk through quiet streets. On the first morning of November, Thomas left his house and walked down Main Street. His boots made a slow rhythm on the sidewalk, crunching over fallen leaves. The shops were open, though few customers entered. The bakery smelled of cinnamon and apples, a reminder of autumn pies cooling on windowsills long ago. "Morning, Tom," called Evelyn Price, the baker's wife, from behind the counter. She was older now, but her voice was still bright, still warm. "Morning, Evelyn," Thomas replied, offering a small smile. He bought a loaf of bread, more out of habit than hunger, and carried it under his arm as he continued his walk. The town square was almost empty. The fountain in the center was dry for the season, its stone edges cold to the touch. A few children chased each other across the square, their laughter rising into the gray sky. For a moment, Thomas paused and listened. The sound of children's laughter was like a spark, brief, fragile, but alive. He kept walking until he reached the edge of town where the old train station stood. The station hadn't seen many trains in years, except for the slow morning line to Charlottesville. Its benches were empty, its windows dusty. Yet Thomas liked to come here, to sit and watch the horizon, as if waiting for something, or someone to arrive. The weight of memories. As he sat on the bench that morning, Thomas pulled his coat tighter. The wind carried the scent of wood smoke from chimneys. He thought of Anna. She loved autumn. She used to decorate her porch with pumpkins, candles, and dried corn. She would laugh when the wind scattered leaves across the steps. Now the house was bare. Thomas could not bring himself to decorate it. He had left the porch empty, the windows plain. Each season passed without color, as though life had paused the day she left. "Maybe this is all November is," he whispered to himself. "Ashes of what used to burn." He stayed until the train came. A few passengers stepped off, their bags in hand, their eyes searching for family or taxis. Among them was a woman in her early 50s, her dark hair streaked with silver. She looked around the empty platform as if uncertain. For a second, her gaze met Thomas's. It was only a glance, but it carried weight, like a question left unspoken. Then she turned and walked away with her suitcase, leaving him with the echo of her footsteps. Evening shadows. When Thomas returned home that evening, the sky was already dim. The daylight ended early in November, leaving long hours of silence. He placed the bread on the counter, poured himself a cup of coffee, and sat by the window. Outside, the street was quiet. A single lamppost flickered to life, casting a pale glow on the fallen leaves. Thomas remembered nights from his childhood when he and his friends played under those same lamps, pretending to be explorers or soldiers. The town had felt endless then, filled with possibilities. Now it felt smaller, quieter, as though the years had folded it into something less alive. On the mantel above the fireplace sat a framed photograph. Thomas in his firefighter's uniform, Anna beside him, her smile radiant. He touched the edge of the frame with his fingertips. "Good night, Anna," he said softly, as he did every night. The fire crackled in the hearth, and Thomas leaned back in his chair. He did not sleep easily anymore, but sometimes the rhythm of the flames carried him into brief dreams. Dreams where Anna still walked beside him through fields of autumn leaves. The stranger's return. The next day, Thomas returned to the train station, as if drawn by habit or by the memory of the woman he had seen. To his quiet surprise, she was there again, standing near the bench with her suitcase beside her. She noticed him and offered a polite smile. "Is this the place where the afternoon train comes through?" she asked. Her voice was clear, with a gentle accent he couldn't place. "Yes," Thomas said, nodding. "Not many passengers, though. Most folks drive these days." "I see." She looked around, then back at him. "Do you mind if I sit?" "Not at all." She sat down, folding her hands in her lap. For a moment, they were silent, listening to the distant sound of crows calling across the fields. "I'm Clara Bennett," she said finally. "I grew up near here many years ago. I haven't been back in a long time." "Thomas Hale," he replied. "I grew up here too, left for work, came back later." Clara nodded. "Funny how life circles back, isn't it?" Thomas gave a small smile. "Yes, circles, or maybe unfinished stories." A spark in the cold. Over the next week, Thomas saw Clara several times, sometimes at the station, sometimes walking through town. She told him she had once lived in Maple Hollow before moving away. Her parents had been teachers at the local school. She was visiting now to settle some family matters, though she didn't explain more. For Thomas, their conversations were like cracks in the heavy silence of his days. They spoke of ordinary things, the weather, the changing leaves, the old houses on Main Street. Yet beneath the simple words was something else, a sense that both of them carried shadows from the past, and that perhaps those shadows could be lighter when shared. One afternoon, as they stood near the square, Clara looked up at the gray sky. She said, "November always feels like a pause to me, a space between what has ended and what has not yet begun." Thomas nodded slowly. "Yes, like ashes before a new fire." Their eyes met. Neither spoke further, but the words hummed between them, warm against the chill air. On the final evening of that first week in November, Thomas once again sat by the fire. The photograph of Anna still rested on the mantel, steady and silent. But tonight, the silence felt different. Not gone, not erased, but softened. He thought of Clara's words, of her presence in the quiet streets. Perhaps Maple Hollow was not only a place of endings,
Perhaps it could also be a place where something, however small, might begin again. Outside, the wind shook the last leaves from the trees. They spiraled through the lamplight like sparks, fading into the darkness. And in that moment, Thomas whispered into the quiet room, "Maybe November still has more to give."
Chapter 2: Echoes of the Past. The second week of November began with mist. Each morning, a pale fog rolled down from the hills, wrapping Maple Hollow in silence. The trees stood like ghosts in the haze, and the houses seemed farther apart, as if the fog stretched the town into another world. Thomas Hale woke early each day, rising before the sun. Sleep came to him in fragments, never whole. Sometimes he dreamed of fire, sirens wailing, smoke choking the air. Other times he dreamed of Anna, her laughter caught forever in a memory he could not touch. This morning he brewed coffee and stood at the kitchen window. The fog outside was thick, but in it he saw a figure walking slowly down the street. At first he thought it might be Clara, but when the person drew closer, he saw it was only a neighbor carrying groceries. Still, the thought of Clara lingered. Meeting at the square. Later that day, Thomas walked to the town square. The fountain was empty, the benches damp with mist. He found Clara there, sitting quietly with a book in her lap. "Morning," he said. His voice sounded rough in the still air. She looked up and smiled faintly. "Morning, Thomas. You walk here often, don't you?" "Every day, it seems. Habit is hard to break." Clara closed her book. "Good habits keep us moving. Bad habits keep us still." He tilted his head, curious. "And which do you think this is?" She shrugged, her eyes thoughtful. "Maybe both. Walking keeps you alive, but sitting alone too long can keep you frozen." Thomas gave a quiet laugh. "Sounds like you've been reading more than that book." Her smile widened just a little. "I read people, too." They sat in silence for a while, watching as a child crossed the square, dragging a stick along the pavement. The stick made a tapping sound, steady as a heartbeat. Shadows in conversation. "Do you ever feel," she asked softly, "that this town holds too many memories? Like every corner remembers something you've forgotten or tried to forget?" Thomas leaned back against the bench. "All the time. That's why I left years ago, and why it feels strange to be back." She nodded slowly. "I left too. Thought I'd never return. But here I am." "What brought you?" She hesitated. She looked down at her hands, then back up at him. "Family things. Old papers, old debts, an old house I'm supposed to sell. Nothing romantic." Her words carried a weight, though she tried to make them light. Thomas recognized the tone. He had used it himself many times, hiding pain under plain speech. "Well," he said gently, "maybe not romantic, but maybe necessary." "Necessary," she repeated. "Yes, that's the right word." The house on Willow Lane. The following afternoon, Clara invited Thomas to walk with her. "I need to see the house," she explained. "I can't do it alone." The house stood on Willow Lane, at the edge of town. It was small, with peeling white paint and shutters that hung crooked. The yard was covered with leaves, the porch sagging under years of neglect. Clara stopped at the gate, her breath visible in the cool air. "I grew up here," she whispered. "Every memory of my childhood lives in these walls. And now, it looks like this." Thomas placed a steady hand on the gate. Houses change when no one's inside them. They forget how to be alive. She glanced at him, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. "Do you believe that?" "I've seen it. Firehouses, old apartments, even my own home after Anna.
He stopped, the words catching. Clara nodded, understanding without pressing. Together they stepped onto the porch. The boards creaked under their weight. Clara unlocked the door with an old key and pushed it open. Inside, the air smelled of dust and forgotten time. Furniture was covered with white sheets. Cobwebs stretched across the corners. Yet on the mantel still sat a row of photographs. Her parents, smiling in faded colors. Clara as a girl holding a dog. Holidays long gone. Clara touched the frames with trembling fingers. I thought I was ready, but I'm not. Thomas spoke softly. No one ever is. Firelight and confession. That evening, Clara came to Thomas's house. He had lit a fire in the hearth, and the glow painted the room in soft gold. She sat in the armchair across from him, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. I was right, she said, about houses. They forget how to be alive, and maybe so do people. Thomas leaned forward. I know that feeling well. For a long moment, they both stared at the fire, the silence between them heavy, but not uncomfortable. Finally, Clara spoke again. I lost someone, too. My brother, years ago. He died young in an accident. That house on Willow Lane, it holds his laughter, his footsteps, his guitar in the corner. I thought I was ready to just walk in and pack things away, but it all came back sharper than I expected. Thomas's chest tightened. I'm sorry, Clara. She shook her head. Don't be. I've carried it for so long, maybe it's time someone else knew. The fire popped, sending sparks upward. Thomas reached for another log and set it on the flames. Sometimes, he said quietly, sharing the weight makes it lighter. Her eyes glistened in the firelight. Do you believe that? I have to. Otherwise I'll drown in silence. The bridge at night. Later that week, Thomas and Clara walked through Maple Hollow at dusk. The town was nearly empty, the air sharp with the promise of winter. They crossed the small wooden bridge over the river that cut through the valley. The water below reflected the pale moon. A few lanterns had been hung along the bridge, their light trembling on the boards. Clara paused in the middle and leaned against the railing. When I was young, I stood here with my brother. We used to drop leaves into the river and race them. He always won. Thomas rested beside her. Anna and I used to come here too. We made promises on this bridge, promises we thought would last forever. Clara turned her face toward him. Did they? His jaw tightened. Not in the way we imagined, but in my heart. Yes, always. They stood in silence, the sound of the river whispering below. For a brief moment, the heaviness of their grief seemed to blend, not cancel, but soften. A shift in the air. By mid-November, the air grew colder. Frost appeared on rooftops each morning. The last leaves clung stubbornly to branches, trembling in every breeze. Something in Thomas began to shift. His days no longer felt entirely empty. He found himself looking forward to seeing Clara, at the square, at Willow Lane, or simply walking the streets. Their conversations were not always deep, but they carried a quiet comfort. One afternoon, as they left the bakery with warm bread in hand, Clara laughed at a memory of her school days. The sound surprised Thomas. It was the first time I had heard her laugh. It struck me like sunlight breaking through clouds. He smiled, almost despite himself. It's good to hear that sound. What sound? Your laugh. It makes the town feel less quiet. Her cheeks flushed faintly in the cold air. Then maybe I should laugh more often. Maybe you should. And for the first time in years, Thomas felt something stir inside him that was not grief, but hope. That night, Thomas returned home and stood at the window. The lamppost outside glowed against the frost, and the world seemed fragile, like glass. On the mantel, the photograph of Anna remained. He touched it gently, as always. But this time he whispered something different. "Anna, I think you'd want me to keep walking, even if it means walking beside someone new." The fire burned low, filling the room with warmth. And in the heart of November, Thomas felt, for the first time in a long while, that the ashes of the past might still hide the spark of another beginning.
Chapter 3. Fires Remembered. The middle of November came with sharp winds. The hills above Maple Hollow were bare now, their trees stripped clean, their branches like black ink against the sky. The air smelt of smoke from wood stoves, and the streets seemed to fold into early darkness each afternoon. For Thomas, the season pressed heavier each day. Memories returned with the cold, the roar of fire, the weight of helmets, the crack of breaking beams. He had carried those years quietly, but lately, with Clara near, the silence inside him stirred. A visit to the firehouse. One afternoon, Thomas walked past the old volunteer firehouse. It was smaller than the stations he had worked in, but the red doors, the siren tower, and the smell of engine oil were the same. Inside, a few young firefighters were checking equipment. One of them, a tall man with sandy hair, recognized him. "Chief Hale?" the young man asked, surprise in his voice. Thomas smiled faintly. "I haven't been chief in a long time." "Still, everyone knows your name. You worked in Richmond, right? You're a legend there." Thomas chuckled softly. "Legends are just men with old stories." They offered him coffee, and he sat for a while, listening to their chatter. Their voices were eager, full of energy. He remembered being that young, when fire seemed like an enemy to defeat, not a shadow that stayed with you forever. Before leaving, one of them asked, "Do you miss it?" Thomas paused, hand on the door. He said, "Every day." And not at all. Clara's question. That evening, Clara joined him for a walk along the river. The water was low, reflecting the pale silver of the moon. "You're quiet tonight," she said gently. "I went to the firehouse," he replied. Her eyes softened. "That must bring a lot back." "It does. Too much, maybe. There are fires I put out years ago that I still smell in my dreams, and others I couldn't put out at all." Clara stopped, looking at him closely. "Anna?" He nodded, throat tight. "It wasn't fire that took her, but I still feel like I failed her. I was always trained to save, but I couldn't save her from illness. And now I sit in that empty house, wondering if my life ended the day hers did." Clara reached out, her hand brushing his arm. "You're still here, Thomas. That means something. It has to." For a long moment they stood there, the river whispering below. Her touch was light, but it steadied him, like a hand on the shoulder in a burning room. The letter. The next day, Clara returned to the house on Willow Lane. She asked Thomas to come, though she did not explain why. Inside, they opened drawers, boxes, and cupboards. Dust rose with every movement. Among the papers, Clara found an envelope sealed with her father's handwriting. She held it with trembling hands. "It's for me," she whispered. Thomas gave her space. She sat by the window, broke the seal, and read silently. Her lips moved slightly over the words. When she finished, tears slipped down her cheeks. She handed the letter to Thomas. "Would you read it aloud? I can't." He hesitated, then took the paper. His voice was steady as he read. "My dearest Clara, if you are reading this, then I am gone. This house holds our memories, but do not let it hold you. You are not meant to live in shadows. Grief is heavy, but it is not the end. Promise me you will carry light, even if only a spark, into the days ahead. Let this house go. Let the past rest. Live, Clara. Truly live. Thomas folded the letter, his hands quiet. Clara covered her face with her palms, her shoulders shaking. He wanted to reach for her, but instead he waited. At last, she whispered, "I thought I came back here to say goodbye, but maybe I came back here to learn how to begin again." Thomas nodded slowly. "Maybe we both did." The town gathering. On the third Saturday of November, the town held its harvest gathering, a small festival before winter closed in. There were stalls of cider, pumpkins, and quilts. Lanterns hung from poles, glowing against the cold night. Thomas had not planned to go, but Clara insisted. "You can't hide forever," she told him, smiling gently. So he went. At the square, music played from a local band. Children ran between the stalls, their laughter carrying above the crowd. The smell of roasted chestnuts filled the air. For the first time in years, Thomas felt part of the town again, not just a shadow moving through its streets. Clara stood beside him, her scarf blowing in the wind. She looked lighter than before, as though the letter had freed something inside her. "Do you dance?" she asked suddenly. Thomas laughed, startled. "Not well." "Neither do I." She held out her hand. "That makes us perfect partners." He hesitated, then took his hand. They stepped onto the square, awkward at first, moving slowly to the music. But as the song carried on, the awkwardness softened. They laughed quietly at their own clumsy steps, and in that laughter, something inside Thomas cracked open, like ice breaking under sunlight. For a moment, he was not a widower, not a man haunted by fire and silence. He was simply a man, holding a woman's hand, moving to the music of November. After the festival. Later, when the lanterns were dim and the crowd had gone, Thomas and Clara walked home together, their breath clouded in the cold air. "That was the first time I've danced in 20 years, Thomas admitted. "Then we'll have to make it a habit," Clara said with a smile. He glanced at her. "You make things sound simple. They don't have to be complicated. Life makes them complicated. People make them heavy, but sometimes it can just be two people walking home in the cold." Thomas nodded, though he felt the weight of her words deeper than she perhaps intended. Dreams and fire. That night, Thomas dreamed again. He was in a burning house, smoke thick around him. He heard Anna's voice calling for him, but he couldn't reach her. Then, through the flames, he saw Clara, standing in the doorway, her hand reaching out. He woke up with a start, sweat cold on his forehead. For a moment, he sat in the dark, heart pounding. Then he rose, went to the window, and looked out on the frost-covered street. "Anna," he whispered, "am I allowed to keep walking? Am I allowed to take someone's hand again?" The lamplight outside flickered in answer, though no real answer came. The next day, Thomas met Clara at the square. She was carrying a small box of papers, ready to sort through the last of the house on Willow Lane. Her eyes were tired but determined. "Winter's coming fast," she said. "I need to decide what to do before the snow." "We'll face it together," Thomas said quietly. Clara looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "Together, then." As they walked down the quiet street side by side, the first snowflakes of the season began to fall. Light, hesitant, like ash drifting from a fire long gone.
Chapter 4: The First Snow. The last week of November began with snow. At first, only a few flakes drifted lazily down, melting as soon as they touched the ground. But by evening, the town of Maple Hollow lay under a soft white blanket. Roofs glistened, trees bent under the weight. The streets were hushed, as though the snow had muffled every sound but the crunch of footsteps. For Thomas Hale, snow was both comfort and warning. It softened the world, made it new. But it also reminded him of winters spent on duty, frozen hoses, icy ladders, and houses burning in the dark, their flames bright against falling snow. That morning, he shoveled the walk in front of his house. The air stung his cheeks, and his breath rose like smoke. When he paused to rest, he noticed Clara walking toward him, her scarf pulled tight against the wind. Clara's decision. "Good morning," she called, her voice carrying across the quiet street. "Morning," Thomas said, leaning on his shovel. "You're out early." "I couldn't sleep," she admitted. "The house on Willow Lane, it won't leave my mind. I keep wondering if I should sell it or if I should try to keep it, repair it. It feels like a choice between holding on and letting go." Thomas studied her face, pale in the cold air. "What do you want?" She hesitated, snowflakes catching in her hair. "Part of me wants to keep it, but when I walk inside, it's like stepping into a cage of memories. My father's voice, my brother's laughter, my mother's piano. It's all there, but none of it is alive. I think if I stay, I'll drown in the past." "Then maybe letting go is the kindest thing," Thomas said softly. Her eyes searched his. "Would you come with me, just one more time, before I decide?" He nodded without hesitation. "Of course." The empty rooms. They went that afternoon. Snow crunched under their boots as they walked up Willow Lane. The house looked even lonelier under its blanket of white, the shutters sagging, the porch heavy with frost. Inside, their breath formed small clouds in the cold air. Clara opened the curtains, letting pale light fall across the dust and the covered furniture. She moved from room to room slowly, touching the walls, the shelves, the doorknobs worn smooth by years of use. Thomas followed quietly, giving her space, yet always near enough if she needed him. In the living room, Clara stopped before the old upright piano. She lifted the cover and pressed a single key. The note rang out, thin and trembling, like a voice that hadn't spoken in years. Tears filled her eyes. "My mother used to play every evening. She said music kept the house warm, even when the fire went out." Thomas stood beside her, silent, listening. The sound faded, leaving only the hush of snow against the windows. At last, Clara closed the lid. "I think it's time," she whispered. "This house has given me everything it can. The rest belongs to memory." Firelight again. That evening, Thomas built a fire in his hearth. Clara sat across from him, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. The flames painted her face in gold and shadow. "You were right," she said. "Houses forget how to be alive when no one lives in them. I think it's time I let this one rest." Thomas nodded. "It's not easy, but maybe it's the only way forward." She studied him across the fire. "You speak as if you know." "I do. Every corner of my house still whispers Anna's name. But if I let it trap me, then I'll never take another step. And she would never want that." Clara's eyes softened. "Anna must have been a remarkable woman." "She was," Thomas said quietly. "She believed in small joys, the way sunlight fell through trees, the taste of fresh bread, the warmth of a fire. She carried light everywhere she went." Clara smiled gently. "Then perhaps some of that light still lives in you." The fire crackled. Thomas lowered his eyes, unsure how to answer. Yet deep inside, something stirred, a spark, against the long silence.
The storm. 2 days later, a storm rolled in from the mountains. The snow fell heavier than before, covering roads, weighing down power lines. By night, the town was cut off, wrapped in deep white silence. Thomas checked his fireplace, made sure he had wood and candles. He thought of Clara on Willow Lane, the lonely house standing against the storm. He considered walking there, but the wind howled too fiercely. Instead, he sat by the fire, restless. Then, near midnight, came a knock at his door. He opened it to find Clara, her coat dusted with snow, her face pale from the cold. "The power's out at the house," she explained, her voice trembling. "I couldn't stay there alone." "Come in," Thomas said at once, pulling her inside. She sat by the fire, shivering until the warmth returned to her cheeks. Thomas placed a blanket over her shoulders. "Thank you," she whispered. "I didn't know where else to go." "You came to the right place," he said gently. Night of shadows. The storm raged outside, snow lashing against the windows. Inside, the fire burned steadily, the only light in the dark. Clara and Thomas sat close, their silence filled, not with emptiness, but with the weight of presence. She leaned her head against the armchair, eyes half closed. "I used to hate storms," she said softly. "When I was little, I thought the wind was angry spirits knocking at the windows. My brother always told me it was just nature, nothing more. But even now, storms make me feel fragile. Storms remind us how small we are, but they also remind us how strong we can be. You came through the snow tonight. That took courage." Her lips curved faintly. "Maybe, or maybe I was just tired of being alone in the dark." Thomas turned his eyes toward her. Their gazes met, steady, unflinching. The firelight flickered between them as if holding its breath. The morning after. When dawn came, the storm had passed. The streets were buried, the world silent under deep snow. From Thomas's window, the town looked new, like a blank page waiting to be written on. Clara stood beside him, the blanket still around her shoulders. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It is," Thomas agreed. For a moment, they simply watched the snow-draped town. Then Clara turned to him. "I'll sell the house. I'll let it go. I don't know where I'll go next, but I know I can't stay there." Thomas's heart tightened. The thought of her leaving Maple Hollow felt like another loss waiting in the shadows. But he only nodded. "Whatever you choose, you'll carry the strength to do it." Her eyes lingered on him. "And what about you, Thomas? Will you carry yours?" He looked out at the snow again, his breath clouding the glass. "I don't know yet, but maybe I'm learning how." That evening, as the sun set in pale pink light over the snowy fields, Thomas and Clara walked together through the quiet streets. Their steps left twin trails behind them. The town was silent, wrapped in the hush of winter's beginning. But within that silence, something new had taken root. A fragile trust, a bond formed not by fire or grief alone, but by the simple act of walking side by side through the storm. And as they turned the corner toward Thomas's house, the lamplight flickering on the snow, Thomas thought, maybe the ashes of November are not the end. Maybe they are the soil where something else can grow.
Chapter 5. The Quiet Return. The first frost of November had settled on Millbrook like a thin veil of glass. The fields shimmered with silver edges, and the air was crisp enough to sting the lungs. Nathan walked slowly through the narrow streets, his hands tucked deep into his coat pockets. Each breath rose like smoke, curling upward before vanishing into the pale sky. It had been nearly a year since Eleanor's passing, yet the town still carried echoes of her. The library, now closed until spring repairs, stood silent like a loyal dog waiting at its master's grave. The bench by the river, where she used to sit with a book, bore the scars of weather, but seemed to keep her presence. And Nathan himself, though stronger than before, still carried her voice in his mind like a hidden lantern. He stopped at the bakery. Mrs. Coleman, with her flour-dusted apron and warm smile, greeted him as though he were family. "You're up early, Nathan," she said, sliding a tray of fresh bread onto the counter. "Habit," he answered simply. "Old firefighter instincts. The town's quiet this time of morning. Feels right." She studied him for a moment, as if to measure the weight of his words. "The quiet can heal, if you let it." Nathan nodded, accepting a loaf. He liked the way the town breathed in autumn, slow, steady, unhurried. It reminded him that healing was not a sudden spark, but a slow ember glowing beneath the ashes. Later that day, he returned to the small cabin on the edge of town, where the woods leaned close, and the ground was soft with fallen leaves. Inside, the fireplace crackled gently, filling the room with warmth. On the mantel sat Eleanor's old journal, its cover worn smooth. Nathan had not read every page, but sometimes he would open it at random, letting her words guide him like stepping stones across a river. That evening, as twilight folded over the valley, he sat by the fire and read. November is not only the season of endings. It is also the time when the world whispers, "Begin again." He closed the book, holding it to his chest. For the first time in many months, he did not feel like a man drowning in absence. He felt like someone standing on a shore, ready to walk forward, even if the path was uncertain. The following morning, Nathan joined a group of volunteers clearing the park near the river. Leaves were raked into golden piles, and children laughed as they jumped through them. One of the younger volunteers, a school teacher named Grace, handed Nathan a cup of hot cider. "You work hard," she said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Do you ever rest?" "Rest doesn't come easy," Nathan replied with a faint smile. "But I'm learning." There was kindness in her eyes, not pity, not curiosity, just kindness. It reminded him that connections, however fragile, were still possible. He didn't need to replace Eleanor. He only needed to continue living in a way that honored her memory. As November deepened, the hills around Millbrook grew bare, their colors fading into shades of gray and brown. But Nathan no longer saw only loss in the season. He began to notice its quiet offerings: the sound of geese flying south in perfect formation, the sparkle of frost on fence posts, the way the river carried fallen leaves as if escorting them to a gentler resting place. On the last evening of the month, he returned to the library steps. He lit a single lantern, setting it down by the locked door. The flame flickered against the dark, small but steady. "This is for you, and for the life we shared." He stood there until the stars came out, their light cold but eternal. Then he turned toward home, walking through the silent town with a calm he had not felt in years. Nathan understood now. November would always carry ashes, the remnants of things lost. But within those ashes lay the warmth of memory, and from memory could rise the fragile beginnings of new life. And so, in the quiet rhythm of Millbrook, beneath the fading light of autumn, he carried both grief and gratitude, both loss and love, both endings and beginnings. The season of ashes had become, in its own way, a season of hope. The end. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to subscribe for more. Was everything clear for you? Did the story feel interesting? Let me know in the comments, and let's keep learning English together, one story at a time.